Hello, I'm Ben Wattenberg. The current welfare debate has focused attention on single mothers, but that's not enough. What about the fathers? Joining us to answer this difficult question are David Blankenhorn, president of the Institute for American Values and author of Fatherless America, Confronting Our Most Urgent Social Problem. Amitai Etzioni, university professor at George Washington University and author of The Spirit of Community, Rights, Responsibilities, and the Communitarian Agenda. Heidi Hartmann, director and president of the Institute for Women's Policy Research and a recipient of a 1994 MacArthur Fellowship Award, the so-called Genius Grant, for her work in the field of women and economics. And Elijah Anderson, professor of sociology at the University of Pennsylvania and author of Streetwise, Race, Class, and Change in an Urban Community. The topic before this house, the sins of the fathers, this week on Think Tank. Is the American family in trouble? In-house fathers, married and unmarried, are a diminishing species. 25% of America's children are now being raised by their mothers alone. Let's look at some father figures. Illegitimacy rates are rising steadily. In 1960, 5% of all babies were born out of wedlock. Today, the rate is almost 30%, and the rate in the black community is almost 70%. Those out-of-wedlock births make up nearly a third of the children in single-mother households. But the majority of fatherless families are the result of divorce, separation, and abandonment. These facts have consequences. Children growing up in female-headed households are much more likely to have a child of their own before age 20, to drop out of high school, to live in poverty, and to commit crimes. In fact, 60% of America's rapists and 72% of adolescent murderers grew up without a resident father. Why is this happening? What can we do about it? Let's go around the horn, once starting with you, David Blankenhorn. Why? Why is it happening?
It's happening because we've changed our minds on the basic question of, do children really need fathers? We have become a society that really doesn't know the answer to that question anymore. And so when we have 40% of the children in the country today living apart from their father, we are passive, and we don't have a culture of fatherhood that requires and expects responsible fatherhood any longer.
Heidi Hartmann?
I think the reasons are primarily economic. I think we've seen a tremendous increase in the economic independence of women. They no longer need to marry to be able to survive economically. And if economics is not going to be the reason for marriage, if women don't have to be forced into marriage just to survive, then we need to find other motivations for marriage and other ways of maintaining ties between parents and their children, even outside marriage.
Eli?
I would tend to agree with Heidi. I think that economics is a very important piece. To the extent that people have jobs and opportunity, men, they tend to form families, I think. But I think jobs and economic opportunity is just a big, big part of it. And when we have increasing poverty the way that we do, we've got to understand that that's related to that.
All right, Amitai?
I see it as coming together of two trends. The general destruction of the family, the devaluing of children, the decline of a sense of responsibility, and the destruction of all authority figures, from labor leaders to priests, from presidents to the press, the destruction of authority. Both of them cross each other in the fatherhood.
All right, let me, Heidi Hartmann and Elijah Anderson, you are both talking about economics and jobs, but seem to be saying something different. You are saying because women have jobs, that encourages fatherlessness, and you are saying because people in poverty don't have jobs, that encourages poverty. Now, is that a contradiction there?
Well,
We probably both agree on both points.
yeah. I'm saying that what we see right now is the fact that so many jobs are going out of the country. Our big cities are in the throes of deindustrialization. Many of these jobs are leaving cities, going to suburbs, non-metropolitan America. they're going overseas. When that happens, it has an impact on the availability of jobs in the inner city. There's so many inner city young black people lacking skills, lacking education, lacking opportunity, don't form families. But yet many of them have the same sexual needs as people have always had. And these get realized, but when babies come, people don't form families. I mean, that's a big part of it. I think, going along with what Amitai has said, I think that a lot of the other pieces fall into place. When you don't have a job and you don't have economic opportunity, authority structures, values with respect to families tend to become shakier, I think.
The way the 2 points are related is to say that the economic benefits of marriage are reduced for women when the men do not have good jobs. I think that's the point that Eli has been making, and I focused on the access to jobs by some women on their own, so that they need the men's job less, or if the men's job is not available, at least they can still have a child and still form a family.
I just think it's real common in the policy debate, especially, to give an economic interpretation of this. I really think it's fundamentally mistaken. We have the highest divorce rate in the world. We have a 31% rate of out-of-wedlock childbearing. We have almost half of the children in the country spending a big part of their childhood apart from their fathers. This is way beyond the unemployment rate. It's way beyond, if more jobs and more affluence were going to strengthen family life, we would be a much different society today. The essence of this, I think, is a cultural shift in our generation. We've changed our minds about what it means to be a husband, a father, a wife, a mother. We've changed our minds about the institution of marriage. And yes, economics matters, but I think it is just a fundamental mistake.
Do you think, David, that when
dwell on the economic aspects of this to the exclusion of the culture?
But do you think that when people get married, and you stress the divorced and the abandoned and the separated as opposed to the out-of-wedlock birth, that when guys get married, in the back of their mind they're saying, well, I'm going to have a kid and then split? Or, I mean, when you say that's the culture, my sense is anybody I know who's getting married is not getting married with that in mind. They're getting married in mind with sort of traditional family values in mind, and then something happens.
Well, first of all, 30% of the children born now are born to never married parents. And the fastest growing family trend in America today is out-of-wedlock childbearing. It's the fastest thing happening out there, and it's growing faster among whites than among non-whites. It's growing faster among people who've been to college than people who haven't. And so, loss of blue-collar jobs, an unemployment rate of, what is it now, 8%? This does not explain this fundamental civilizational shift that we have experienced in this generation over whether or not children deserve fathers and whether or not we have standards of male responsibility on this issue. To drive it down to unemployment, I think, of course it matters, but I think we miss the fundamental if we don't understand this essentially as a cultural question.
Let's get Amitai in here for the communitarian view of this.
Clearly there are economic factors, but even there it works both ways. When you break up a family and you create two households, and you then have more income than before, you increase the cost. So it's not only the economy that's driving up the breakup of the breakup of the family has poverty-producing consequences. But I'd like to talk for a moment about the importance of having fathers, because there's some very interesting sociological studies of this. And basically what they argue is somewhat sophisticated. They argue that for a child to grow up proper, it needs two engines. One is which produces basically love and security and reassurance. And the other, the pressure to achievement, to reach and break up, in effect, the comfortableness, the coziness. And that you need these two engines to work hand in hand. Now, it's not necessary, and not often in other societies didn't work this way, that the father was the achievement or disciplinarian and the mother was the warmth and affection. But the separation of roles seems to be essential. And one more thing, that the two will be in coalition with each other rather than fighting each other. So well-developed children have both a love engine and an achievement engine and a coalition between the two.
Heidi, can you have a successful child without those factors?
Well, I think you can, but you do it through combining them in the same parent. We're relying on other adults, the grandmothers, the grandparents, the teacher, And I think many children obviously have succeeded coming from single-parent homes. I think I want to...
Are you distressed about this diminishment of numbers of children or rates of children without fathers?
I am distressed about what David called the failure of fathers to take continuing responsibility for their children. I think, though, that some of the cultural change that we all seem to be regretting these days has been positive. I think for people to escape oppressive marriages, to escape alcoholism or drug addiction of a spouse, to escape violence. These are all positive cultural values which women put up with for their whole lives because they saw in the past no escape from these marriages. So there's a positive side to it as well as a negative side.
The abusive and violent and alcoholism, drug abuse, this accounts for a relatively small fraction of children today living apart from their fathers. Most of it comes from parents where there's not violence and abuse, they just don't get along together, and A, they never got married in the first place, or B, most marriages today end in divorce. So it's just wrong to say a 40% rate of fatherlessness today is okay because we want people to be able to escape abusive relationships. Yes, we want them to, but 40% fatherlessness doesn't come from cases of, axe murdering and drug abuse and violence.
But there's other ways of being oppressive.
The numbers don't add up there.
I didn't expect to find myself on the side of Heidi here, but let me say that there are other ways for men to be oppressive to women without waving an axe. So what we need is not a simplistic return to the old family, but we need a new family of equal partners in which people will both assume their roles and supplement and complement each other.
Which is what we have today among most married couples. If you do the interviews and look at the clinical evidence, the married women today will say, I get a much better deal from my husband than my mother got from my father. Fathers today, married residential fathers, are more involved in child rearing. They do more work in the home. They are more emotionally expressive. They tell their children they love them. They do all the things that we want them to do under a companionate, more egalitarian model of marriage. The problem is their ranks are thinning every year. And so this is not a gender role issue any more than it's an economic issue.
Let me ask one. Eli, you commit sociology on the ground. That is your specialty in the inner city particularly. Can you tell us and our audience, what are you picking up there? What do you hear? What are these young people saying who are the topic of our conversation?
I think just to respond to David and Heidi here, and Amitai, I mean, it's very important to understand the economy is important, it's very important. The other cultural issues are there as well. I mean, I'm not denying that. I talk to young people in the inner city. I talk to young men who don't get married. And I say, why? Why don't you get married? You had this child. Young men tell me, I can't play house. I can't play house. What that means is that they can't play house the way they like to play house. They like to mimic the American dream oftentimes. They have a conception of that. Mother, father, at home, children, picket fence, the whole bit. That's extreme perhaps a little bit, but this is a vision. But given the jobs these young men are able to get or not able to get, they can't play house in that way. And the young boys understand that without a job, without economic opportunity, they can't expect to dominate that house. They can't tell the woman what to do. They can't tell her how to dress. She will talk back. She might do other things that they don't like to the extent that they don't have economic ability to tighten up that situation.
Giving me not 2 weeks to change that.
And sometimes the abuse that you talk about is related to the inability to control the household through economic means. A lot of the men would like to be fathers, like to be husbands, but on their terms. Now, their terms oftentimes gets us into tricky water with sexism, domination, and that kind of thing. But a lot of the young men see the wider culture as being involved in these kinds of relationships, and they'd like to mimic some of these.
Most of what you're talking about is cultural analysis, and I agree with it, and you've written provocatively about it in your book Streetwise. I guess the point I would respond to is that's true, and therefore let's talk about the culture. Let's talk about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a father, what it means to be a husband. But I think that it's a little too reductionist to simply drop it all down to this question of jobs. Jobs are terrific, let's have more of them, but isn't this really, you were talking about the culture. You were talking about cultural attitudes there.
Poverty works against the family.
Yes, that's right.
Poverty works against the family.
We have had periods in relatively recent decades where poverty was higher, unemployment was higher, and out-of-wedlock birth was substantially lower. So why are you and Heidi particularly, making this point that there is a direct causal effect between unemployment and poverty and out-of-wedlock birth? I mean, certainly if you go back to the Depression, you did not have high out-of-wedlock rates of birth, and you had very high unemployment.
Sure.
And
Something's happening.
Poverty.
Something's happening. I'm kind of giving you the ethnographic story. This is what I observe. These are the things that young men say. I think that if we had more opportunities for independent income, you'd probably see more family formation. That doesn't mean that it would be exactly the way we might want as middle class people, or people who are very concerned about sexism, domination, that kind of thing. But I think more of these men would try to form families if indeed they had economic opportunity. Without economic opportunity, people get by any way they can.
Yeah, but you know, I was just looking at this. The rate of teenagers graduating from high school, black and white, is at an all-time high, and there is almost parity now between blacks and whites, which is an astonishing fact for any of those of us who have studied data over the years. So that would seem to say, I mean, it's like in the high 80s or low 90s for both whites and blacks. That would seem to say that there is opportunity for advancement. They are following through, and yet you have this cultural thing.
Yes,
but that David is talking about.
And also, it's not, I mean, just the numbers. Compare the unemployment rate to the fatherlessness rate. It's wildly out of proportion. If you ask people in a community, what would you like to, which number is the worst number in your neighborhood? The unemployment rate or the fatherlessness rate or the out-of-wedlock childbearing rate? It's the cultural trend, this abandonment of men from the lives of their children is dwarfing anything that's going on in the economy.
Let me just add here something, because it's really dangerous to turn this into a ghetto issue. It's not like, and I want to get out of there.
Faster among whites than among blacks, faster among college educated than non-college educated.
So,
it's a societal issue.
Let's talk about the absence of fathers in the middle class.
Right.
And there again, obviously, at least economically, they're somewhat more comfortable, and there the cultural factors stick out even more clearly. And there is, I completely agree with David, there's an abandonment. There's a studies done in Pennsylvania showing that within a year, fathers are divorced or separated, just forget about their children. This is like almost an incredible lack of responsibility and commitment.
Not much child support, not much visitation within a year or so after divorce. And so the fatherlessness engine in our society, I think, cuts across class and really, with some important exceptions, has very little to do with the track that the economy is on.
Time out for a minute. We're talking now about what's broken. Heidi, why don't you start? If it's broken, how do we fix it? What can we do?
I think one of the things we haven't done is adjust public policy to meet the needs of basically the two working parent family. Something like a shorter workday, something like real assistance with child care and elder care for these families. The mothers have taken on a tremendous new responsibility for financial support of the family. And I think although some fathers are certainly participating more in child care and the housework they also have to do to maintain the family, others aren't. And I think where we have public policy or public institutions that can support the families, for example, through eating canteens that would be very common in your neighborhood school. You pick up your children after school and you have dinner there before you go home. This was something we apparently had in World War II. So there are lots of ways to support working families through public policy, and not the least of which is financial. I think all working parents that are low income, whether they're single or married, should have access to financial support from the rest of us.
Eli, do you have a little kit of remedies the way Heidi does?
Well, if you assume, I mean, I think the cultural change issues there are certainly things are changing in certain ways. And I think there's a devaluation of the family and all that. But I think that if we assume that the transformation is going on and that there is distress, not only among the very poor, but also the middle classes, certainly various institutions are going to be under stress, including particularly the family. Now, I would say that when young people have a sense of the future, have a really positive sense of the future, they probably don't get pregnant as easily as do people who don't. I think that if you compare people that I study, inner city poor young people who get pregnant the way they do, if you compare these people with white and black college students, there's probably just as much sexual activity going on, but the college students don't get pregnant. The reason is that these people have a positive sense of the future, a sense that if they do certain things, then their future is going to be disrupted. The inner city poor don't have that same outlook, and that's got to change. If you want to do something in terms of really trying to instill values, you've got to change that situation, and that's where the economy comes in. That's why so many young people don't form families, I think.
Amitai, remedies?
Well, I'm all in favor of giving people hope, but we need to help young people to communicate better with each other. It's a teachable skill. Our study shows that couples which break up fight about as often as couples who stay together, but the second couples fight better. They don't attack each other personally, they attack the issue, and there are many teachable skills which we should teach.
You mean that remarriage is less turbulent than first marriage?
No, before you get married in high school, we should teach you how to resolve conflicts, so when you get married, the marriage is going to last better. Many churches and synagogues now insist before they marry you that you come for several meetings in which they'll see if you're together and how many children you're going to have, what happens if you have to move and the other one has a job. Taking marriage more seriously. We surely need to change our valuation in which we cherish when people dedicate themselves to their children. We need flex time, we need child allowance. I'm all in favor of the $500. It's just a starter. All other countries give you, all other developed countries give you a year of paid leave, fathers and mothers. So we need to work on both sides of the street. But let me say one thing as a father of 5 sons, that in the end it's a question of dedication. And nothing I did in my life has been more rewarding, despite whatever feathers I have in my cup, than having spent time with my sons. And I just want to tell the viewers that try it, you're going to like it.
I would endorse that without any equivocation. David Blankenhorn, I know you are traveling around the country with your new book, Fatherless America, and you are purveying a set of remedies or near remedies. Could you give us a brief, your mantra briefly?
Well, let us improve the economy as much as we can, yes. Let us assist working couples with child care, but basically the challenge before us is a culture shift, a change of heart and priorities about whether or not children deserve their fathers. And the basic idea is the divorce rate's way too high, out of wedlock childbearing is wrong, and every child deserves a father. Now, if we change our minds on those set of issues in that direction, we'll change some of our public policies, welfare, tax, etc. We'll change some of our institutions, daycare centers in the junior highs, and so on. There'll be legal changes, rethinking no-fault divorce laws. But the basic issue, and I think that we tend to just almost bend over backwards not to say this honestly, the basic issue is attitudinal. It's a normative question about what it means to be a responsible father and what it means to be married. So it's an attitudinal shift. In my effort with the National Fatherhood Initiative and going around and having these community meetings is twofold. One is, let us have a national debate on the crisis of fatherlessness. 2, let us resolve to reverse the trend by changing our minds on the basic question of, does every child deserve a father? In the wake of that change, many other legal and public policy changes will happen. I mention a lot of them in my book, but the central the most important thing to change is our minds.
Okay, thank you, Amitai Etzioni, David Blankenhorn, Elijah Anderson, and Heidi Hartmann. And thank you. Please send your questions and comments to New River Media, 1150 17th Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20036, or we can be reached via email at thinktv@aol.com. For Think Tank, I'm Ben Wattenberg.
This has been a production of BJW Incorporated in association with New River Media, which are solely responsible for its content.